All right, let's get right into it. The Battle of Stalingrad. This wasn't just a battle. It was a seismic event that literally changed the course of World War II. We're talking about one of the biggest, bloodiest, and without a doubt, one of the most decisive battles in the history of warfare. Ever.
You know, to really get a feel for what this was like, you've got to hear from the people who were actually there. And this quote from a German lieutenant's journal, wow, it just hits you. This wasn't some grand strategic map with arrows. No, this was a brutal, desperate fight where every single step forward was paid for in blood.
And the human cost, it's a number that's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. The minimum estimate for total casualties, we're talking killed, wounded, captured, is over 1.1 million in one single battle. Think about that. That's like wiping a major city off the map in the span of about 6 months. Just staggering.
So that leads to the big question, right? How on earth did a fight for this one city, way out in the middle of the Soviet Union, become the absolute turning point for the entire Second World War? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack.
All right, let's start from the top. Act 1, the onslaught. We're going to look at the huge German push in the summer of '42 and figure out why Stalingrad, of all places, ended up in their crosshairs.
Okay, so the German plan was called Case Blue. And here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize. Stalingrad wasn't even the main prize at first. Not at all. The Germans were running on fumes. They desperately needed oil. The real goal was the Caucasus oil fields, way to the south. Stalingrad, it was just supposed to be a sideshow, really, a way to protect the flank of the main army heading for the oil.
But, well, things changed. Fast. The city wasn't just a flank guard. It was a huge industrial center. It sat on the Volga River, a critical supply artery. And then there was the name, Stalingrad, Stalin's city. Suddenly, this battle wasn't just about strategy anymore. It became personal. For Hitler and for Stalin, it was a massive propaganda battle, a matter of pure ego and will.
And man, that initial German advance was lightning. Case Blue kicks off in late June. By late July, Hitler is obsessed. He has to have the city. And then just a month after that, August 23rd, the German 6th Army, these are some of their best troops, are right at the edge of the city. And that's when the Luftwaffe just unloads on them with a bombing campaign that's hard to even imagine.
And apocalyptic is really the only word for it. Just look at that number, 90%. Over 90% of the city's homes were just gone, turned to dust. And get this is all before the main ground attack even started. The Germans basically turned the city into a sea of rubble, a fortress of ruins, for their own troops to fight in.
So now we move into Act 2. And the name says it all, the meat grinder. Because that's exactly what the city became. This is where the battle devolves into some of the most savage, brutal city fighting the world has ever seen.
The Germans even had a word for it, Rattenkrieg. It means rat war, and it's a terrifyingly accurate description. This wasn't a war for city blocks. It was a war for single rooms, for basements, for sewers. Soldiers were literally hunting each other like rats in a maze of rubble, fighting for every single inch.
So, the Soviet commander, a guy named Vasily Chukov, he knew his soldiers were outmatched by German tanks and planes in a straight-up fight. So, he changed the rules. He came up with this brilliant, desperate tactic, hug the enemy. Basically, get your men so close to the Germans, literally meters away, that their artillery and their air force become useless. If they bomb you, they bomb themselves. Every apartment, every factory was turned into a fortress, defended by these small, quick-moving squads that knew the ruins like the back of their hand.
And if you want a perfect example of this, look no further than Pavlov's house. It's just a normal apartment building. A single Soviet platoon held it for nearly 2 months. 2 months! Now listen to this, because it's insane. More German soldiers died trying to take that one building than died during the entire capture of Paris. Let that sink in. It's just an unbelievable story of sheer grit.
Yeah, this other quote from a German lieutenant really says it all. A vast furnace. That's what the city became. That lightning-fast German advance, it was completely bogged down, bleeding to death in the rubble. They got so close. They took 90% of the city. But that last little strip of land, right on the bank of the Volga River, they just couldn't take it. And that failure would cost them everything.
And that single failure, not being able to push the Soviets into the river, that's what sets up the final act. Act 3, the reversal. This is the moment where the Soviets, who seemed all but defeated, pull off one of the most incredible comebacks in military history. So here was the fatal mistake the Germans made. While all their best soldiers, the Sixth Army, were being bled white inside the city itself, who was guarding the long, massive exposed flanks out on the open plains? Not elite Germans, it was Romanian and other Allied armies. And these guys were stretched thin, they were poorly equipped, and most importantly, they had hardly any decent anti-tank guns. It was a massive weak spot, and the Soviets saw it.
And on November 19th, they struck. The Red Army launched Operation Uranus. It was this huge pincer movement, a giant double attack, hitting both of those weak flanks at the same time. The Romanian armies just crumbled. And in only 4 days, the two Soviet pincers met up behind the Germans. The traps snapped shut. The entire German Sixth Army was surrounded.
And just like that, it was over. Around 330,000 Axis soldiers were now the ones who were trapped. They were stuck in what the Germans called the Kessel, the cauldron. And to make everything worse, the legendary Russian winter was just getting started, and their food and ammo were running out.
Now, Hitler ordered them to stay put. He absolutely forbade them from trying to break out, promising he'd supply them from the air. That promise was a complete disaster. Look at the numbers. They needed 750 tons of supplies every single day. What did they get? On a good day, maybe 100. It was a death sentence. Their fate was sealed.
They held out for 2 more months. 2 months of starving in the freezing cold. But the end was inevitable. On February 2, 1943, Field Marshal Paulus, who Hitler had just promoted hoping he'd fight to the death, surrendered. This was a huge blow to German prestige. I mean, a German field marshal had never been captured before, ever. Hitler was beyond furious.
When the fighting finally stopped, about 91,000 German and Axis soldiers were left to be taken prisoner. They were skeletons, basically, starving and frostbitten.
But for those 91,000 men, the horror was just beginning. Of that entire group marched off to Soviet prison camps, only about 5,000 ever made it home. 5,000 out of 91,000. The rest just vanished.
And when you zoom out and look at the total casualties for the whole campaign, the numbers are just sickening. Almost 2 million people in total. The Axis lost around 850,000, but look at the Soviet losses, over 1.1 million. The winners lost more people than the losers. By any measure, this was the single deadliest battle in the history of the world.
So why do we call this the turning point? Well, it's pretty simple. Germany lost its best army, the Sixth Army, which was completely wiped out. The myth that the German military was invincible? Shattered. Forever. Their push into the Soviet Union was stopped dead in its tracks. And from that moment on, it was the Soviets who are on the attack. The entire momentum of the war on the Eastern Front had shifted.
And that really leaves us with a final, very heavy thought. There's no doubt the Soviet victory at Stalingrad was absolutely monumental. It turned the tide of the war. But that victory came at a price that is just beyond comprehension. And it makes you ask a really tough question. When a victory costs you more than 1 million of your own people, how do you even begin to calculate what that's worth?